Okay, welcome, folks, to the Friday Night Farm stream, and give everybody a chance to filter in for a minute, and we'll get going with things tonight. I got a handful of things to talk about, and I guess you could call it a grab bag of topics that I want to discuss with you all. But the first thing I want to do, and I know this may be a little out of order, so for some of you who may be watching this afterwards, I know everybody has different preferences, but I want to start off by just thanking those of you either who are here and participating in this stream with us, um, who are like first time new channel subscribers and folks that have found my channel recently. I have gotten a whole bunch of new subscribers recently, and that has been very impactful on me. I think a lot of you guys who have just come to the channel recently have come from the video that I made about Pete from Just a Few Acres Farm. And I'm really happy that that has been the point of connection for so many of you guys. And I just want to say, for those of you, if you're a first time viewer on the live streams, participant, or lurker after the fact, thanks for being here and taking the time to engage in this conversation. Tonight, we got a handful of things that I want to talk about because there's some updates on the food freedom side of things, both to hash out a couple of things in terms of where the Prime Act stands now that Thomas Massey has been uh, effectively removed, although he still has another, I believe, 9 or so months before he's actually out of office. So it's not all completely bad news there. And of course, the implications of that election are far reaching, and that's something that we can kick around a little bit. Also, I wanted to talk about farrowing and some of the stuff that's going on. I've been making some posts recently on the channel with my mystery number of piglets, and I am very pleased to say that we have 3 new litters that are safely delivered. Now, obviously, it's not over till the fat piggy sings, and so there's still time for mamas to goof around and roll over on some babies and whatnot. But in the barn, we have 20 piglets between the 2 mamas there, and then down in the pasture we have 7 from the mama down there. So total right now we're sitting at about 27, and we still need probably another 15 to get me caught up with everything that I lost in the spring for my clients. But at the same time, it's still really nice to see some healthy piglets running around. They're very, very lively, and they're acting acting up, which is good because that means it's harder for mom to step on them, and it means that they're healthy and they're doing real well. And I got a question recently from Craig, who's one of our channel members, and I will just mention in passing that channel memberships are open, and for $2-3 a month, you can sign up to be a channel member and support the work that we are doing. As our memberships increase, then I'm going to start making content specifically for the channel members because as the YouTube discussion grows, there's different veins of content that will naturally develop. And some of the content that I do is very task oriented and related to a certain topic like breeding and castrating pigs, or tonight I want to talk a little bit about when to wean pigs, because I got some questions from some people about that, and Craig brought that up with me, and I wanted to discuss that a little bit with you guys and hear from you all, because I realize some of you guys might know more than I do about some of this stuff. But also, right now, channel members get early access to everything that I post. So I upload everything. Channel members always get immediate access. And then after I fine tune everything, it goes out to the general public. And lest you guys all think that I'm just here shilling for shekels on the channel. And good evening to Mike and Rob. I see you guys in here this evening. Thank you guys for being here. Always nice, like when I see people popping into the chat and getting the conversation going, because I can't see behind the streaming app, and so I can't see like how many people are in here. I mean, I could if I were to use my phone, but once I see people popping up into the chat, then I know everybody's here. And guys, if you haven't already, just like the stream. That helps us get more algorithmic momentum to get out there to, um, you know, to reach more people so that everybody knows that we're going live and can join in the conversation. But I wanted to talk a little bit about weaning piglets tonight. Wanted to give you guys a little bit of an update post election with Massey about kind of the food freedom side of things, both locally here in New Hampshire, where we have some updates on the local bill that's kind of a local analog to the Prime Act, which is kind of the federal half of that he was working on, and also some updates, for those of you that are more in the New Hampshire and local area about what's going on with House Bill 396. And then also just to talk a little bit about some of the things that are, I don't want to say changes, but additional things that I'm doing, because as I was talking a moment ago about channel memberships, there's different types of content, and everybody kind of has different things that they're interested in. And oh, good evening, Isaac. You got 3 farrowing this month. That's awesome. That's a good, you'll have a barn full and plenty to do here shortly. That's awesome. So this is a topical conversation about the farrowing and the weaning, and kind of how and when that we choose to do that, and some of the things that I look for. But as the channel grows, there's a certain evolution in channel content. It was interesting because got a bunch of new subscribers, as I mentioned, that came from the video that I made about Pete from Just a Few Acres Farm. And one of the commenters, and initially when I read the comment, it sounded a little bit, it kind of irked me. And then I actually read it in its entirety, and I realized it wasn't meant to be insulting or anything like that. But the guy just said that he liked Pete because Pete never asked people to subscribe. And it got me thinking about that dynamic where, on one hand, good work and good content speaks for itself and people will show up. At the same time, people, especially with the algorithm being so finely tuned to what we're interested in seeing, a lot of times people, I know there's a lot of channels that I watch that I'm not subscribed to. And so, excuse me. So I'm not subscribed to them. And a lot of times I don't think to subscribe. I know that their stuff just shows up in my feed and I enjoy it. So I watch it. And pardon me. So sometimes a reminder is appropriate to help people, so that they know. And so I'm kind of on the fence about that. But as I was thinking about it, I hope to be able to develop my channel here and what we're doing to accommodate a wide variety of different people, but to do it in a way that is natural and not transactional. To be able to make stuff and make content for you guys that is really just an extension of who I am, where I'm sharing things in a way that feels natural and reasonable, rather than just playing to the algorithm. And obviously Pete did a fantastic job of doing that, which is why he inspires so many of us. I've gotten so many comments on that video about, other people who miss his videos, and he's still alive, he's still with us, so it's not like he's gone, but just not being able to participate in that. And so I've been thinking of different ways that I can share more of what I'm doing without strictly crafting content that is related to a specific topic, something that's searchable, that's going to get picked up and put into a search result somewhere, but rather just, hey, here's what I'm doing. Hey, look what's going on. Come hang out on the farm type of stuff. And so tonight I shot the first of what may develop into many more of these type of things. I just put the camera down in the pasture, out of reach of the pigs this time. Put the camera down in the pasture, put a microphone out there, and just kind of let's hang out with the pigs type of thing. So I'm going to be uploading that in the next couple of days here. I also have the video about putting up the grain bin and kind of some of the nuts and bolts of moving to a grain bin from the totes, and bulk feed versus bag feed, and And then I have a 4-video series about feeding pigs, talking about feeders and some other stuff that I'm not going to, spill the beans just yet on that, but a lot to talk about and a lot coming up. But I just am looking for new ways to be able to share more and better content. And then as we get more channel memberships and have the ability to say, okay, we're developing a direction that the channel members want to go, like what does going deeper look like for people that are interested in watching this channel? And then we can really focus some of that deeper content to the people who are supporting the channel and who are looking for that. And then at the same time, still be able to put out more like superficial content where there's some people that just like seeing the work being done, but they're not, raising pigs or really interested in the mission of making America farmers again. They just kind of like hanging out. And that's really important too, because that's, part of changing the conversation. So a little bit of inside baseball there, kind of what's going on and what we're working on around here. Piglets have kept us really busy. And, it's been trying to keep track of everything because I've been trying to catch up and get all of the lost piglets accounted for and get those customers taken care of and try to do that in a way that's timely and not forgetting things, because in the process of having to swap in outside piglets, there are some folks that you're communicating with one, and some people they communicate a little bit more and then you forget about the other ones. And I had a customer today who's coming out here, and I'm thinking to myself, did I mention to her that these are not like my piglets, because obviously we lost a bunch in the spring. And I thought that I had told her, but then I go back, I'm looking through emails and I'm like, uh-oh, I better let her know. And just trying to keep up with all of that stuff. There's always something with farming, which is part of the challenge. That's part of what makes it fun, but it's also a lot of strands in old Duder's head. Let's see. Red Sky Responder, Greg, right? Wait, there's Greg and there's Craig. Hawaii is here, still light out. So currently on the riding lawnmower. That's a good way to be. And live streaming is a good good party to join when you're on the mower. I actually did a little mowing today myself, push mower, and I'll tell you, I'm very proud of myself, because after having the engine sitting full of ethanol fuel all winter, you might be catching a theme here that I am not a mechanic. The engine was kind of idling pretty rough, and so I had to take it apart and do the carb choke cleaner. And for the first time in my life, I successfully, I don't want to say fix, because it was really just kind of dirty. It wasn't really, didn't need to be fixed, but I rehabilitated the engine and got it running. And for me, kind of a big thing, because I'm used to always just having to either buy another one or tear my hair out or ask somebody else to fix it. But managed to get that done, and I cut a little bit of grass as well. So 'tis the season, I guess, both here and there. So I want to give you guys a quick update on House Bill 396 here in the state of New Hampshire. Of course, for those of you who may not be familiar, House Bill 396 is very much involved with and related to food freedom, and it is the most aggressive states' rights bill that basically decriminalizes non-USDA, non-federally inspected and processed meat for sale intra-state. And there are a handful of other states that have different iterations of similar types of bills, but they are all much more delicate in the way that they put themselves in the potential crosshairs of the federal law and the federal government for obvious reasons. And we'll talk about the election that happened this past week in a moment. But that bill has now officially passed the Senate, and it is going to the governor. And there's still some question about if there's going to be any last minute alterations or if she's just going to sign it, and that's going to be that. But it looks like we are pretty much just waiting for a signature on the bill. And at this point, House Bill 396 in the state of New Hampshire will allow us to sell in state lines and processed and slaughtered in state to individuals, to restaurants, to grocery stores that are servicing in state customers. So it's quite liberal, I know, and not politically liberal, of course. I mean, like, it's gives a lot of freedom to farmers and to custom processors. And as I've mentioned in other streams, because I know we've talked about this a decent amount, I am planning on doing a full in-depth interview with my butcher, who is a very, very interesting guy, and he's a custom butcher as well. Although he does also do some USDA work in another shop, so he's kind of got a foot in both worlds, and he's a big advocate for food freedom and very interesting guy. Military, very well versed, well traveled military guy, ex special forces guy, and salt of the earth, super nice. But I'm looking forward to having him on and having a conversation with him and sharing that with all of you guys, because I think it's going to be very telling. I think there's a lot of, like, it's going to take time for all of these changes to start to work. It's kind of like when something I had to do the other day because I randomly got a flat tire on my truck. This is my, like, growing up and becoming a man thing that happened at 43 years old, but better late than never, I suppose. Where I got a flat tire, like, out of the clear blue sky. I went to town for something. I came back. I get out of the truck. I was getting ready to go back to the other town in the other direction, up to Claremont. I was going to go get some fuel for my chainsaw. Remind me to tell you how not to fell trees that are big and rotten and dangerous. I learned about that too. But I get out of the truck and I hear this, like, hissing sound, and I'm, like, looking around, like, what the hell's going on? And of course, I go back behind the truck, and it's literally like I could feel the air pissing out of the tire. So I was like, oh, okay. So now I have to do that whole process. But in the process, of course, everything gets corroded and you have all this dirt, because in New England, nothing is dry and clean. Everything is muddy and gets caked on in layers over time, where it's like, cutting a tree and you can see the different rings of filth and sediment that have deposited themselves in the inner mechanisms and workings of your vehicle over the years. And so after I got all the lug nuts off, and, like, I still couldn't budge the wheel. It was on there, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I don't want to, like, start smashing this thing and, like, bend something or break something and, wind up causing damage. So I just started off with a bunch of WD-40 and kind of going around any place I could find a spot and trying to loosen things up. And it takes time for that to work. And eventually, of course, the wheel came off, got fixed. But it takes time, and it's not just putting on the WD-40, it's having the patience to allow those changes to take effect. And that's one of the things that I think that we're going to start to see with these food freedom movements in states, and that are also starting to trickle up into federal law with things like the Prime Act. As more states start to do this, I am hopeful and optimistic that, in similar ways to what has happened with, marijuana, that as more people begin to adopt this, somebody's got to always go first and stick their neck out there. But if we can do it well in New Hampshire and open that door for other states that already are kind of sniffing around that idea of violating federal law, but for something that shouldn't be a law, frankly, then more states are going to keep moving forward with this, and we really get a foot in the door and open that up to more people. And so part of that is going to be more butcher shops opening up and more business for the shops that are already here, and hopefully a corner of the agricultural industry that kind of catches catches on fire, and really in a good way, and springs to life over the next couple of years as this starts to ramp up. So good news on that front, something that frankly we don't get a lot of these days, but I want to focus on that because it's important, and it's encouraging, and the implications of what that will mean in a further reaching sense also something that's real important. And with the Prime Act on the federal side, the Prime Act is kind of a watered down version that basically makes it so that states can impose their own inspections. It doesn't actually leave the door open for states to say, yeah, we're going to let farmers and consumers do what they want. It actually says if states are doing their own inspections, then the federal government will give them a pass. And so, as you may or may not have heard, I feel like most people have heard, although that might be just the bubble that I'm in, because when I'm doing farm work, I'm usually not listening to farm YouTubers. I'm usually listening to political stuff, all different stripes, but I like to listen to the political stuff and kind of stay up to date with the drama. Occasionally, I'll even venture into Piers Morgan and listen to, the Zionists yell at the, Cenk Uyghur and like that kind of stuff. A little bit of red meat. It's entertaining, I'll admit. Um, but this week with the election that happened, there's a couple different ways to look at this, and I promise I'm not going to get too derailed on political stuff this stream, but this is very relevant because one of the concerns I had was if Massey does not get reelected, then what does that mean for the Prime Act? And as it turns out, there is a trial run, which is kind of a watered down version of the Prime Act, which is a watered down version of. So it's kind of like a few steps down from what would actually be like a really big win, but it's still something. An iteration of the Prime Act has actually been put into the 2026 Farm Bill, which is most likely going to pass. So that is, even despite the fact that Massey himself is not going to be, in office as a congressman for, too much longer. I think he's got about 9 months, and then he's going to be out of there in January. At least we have something moving in that direction as a direct result of his effort, which is still a very big success because we don't see a lot of repeal of federal regulations or allowance for a alternative to federal regulations. Almost always what we see is more federal regulations and more federal regulations and more and more and more. It's always a slow creep, but not only stopping that creep, but actually pushing it back a little bit is kind of a big thing. Now, hopefully, there will be some congressional reps that will take up the Prime Act and keep that moving forward so that we can actually get an individual piece of legislation in there that holds that place open in a more permanent and more official capacity, because what they wrote into the 2026 Farm Bill, it's temporary. It doesn't actually change any federal laws. It's just, hey, how about if we try this for a year and see where that goes? It's very, very weak, very temporary, but we need to get, a bigger and more permanent version of that in place so that we actually have something that will stick. And, being candid, I was not too surprised at the way the election turned out. And I don't really believe that, I certainly have political leanings and opinions, which I share probably too frequently for some of you and maybe not enough for others of you on these videos and on the stream. But it's part and parcel of who I am, so I'm not going to be reticent about saying how I feel about the state of the world, because the state of the world is largely what drove me into farming and doing everything the hard way, because their grocery stores still have meat and we could still go there and just save ourselves the trouble of having to buy tons of feed and deal with electric fences and animals getting out and all that jazz, right? But there's a reason why we're here doing this, and it's because of the fact that there's nobody coming to save us. And that's a lesson that we have kind of been getting beaten over the head with in the way that the Trump administration has been behaving towards the people who voted for it, for them, him, however you want to slice that. And then it's just kind of getting double tapped as we have a foreign country coming in and literally buying a congressional seat out of a local race and then rubbing it in everybody's faces and going on X, erstwhile Twitter, and telling people, hey, we did it, we just got rid of this guy, and if you're against Israel, then we're gonna basically remove you. And so that's not encouraging. I'm not happy about that. But at the same time, this, as happens in a lot of things, like even looking at how uh, myself and maybe some of you guys got interested in this stuff with the the pandemic that happened. Obviously, that's a pretty bad thing. But there's a lot of us here, myself literally, who are involved in pursuing this stuff and trying to fix things that have been broken for a while because nobody notices them. We're here doing this stuff because of the fact that there was a shortfall in the system, and you hit that big of a speed bump, and then it's like, wait, what's going on here? We need to actually pay attention and fix this. And in a lot of ways, what I'm seeing and anticipating and hoping for would be that people start to notice what's going on and pay attention to, wait a minute, they did what? Like, this just happened out of nowhere. Um, and waking people up a little bit, and we'll see what happens. I mean, I think in a lot of ways this could be an issue that galvanizes a lot of disenfranchised voters who otherwise were just going to just stay home for the next couple of election cycles just because they're over it, and they kind of came out of their comfort zone to pull the lever to get Trump in the first place. And then it's like, this is old boss same as the new boss, never mind. But having a new, call it martyr, who has been sort of sacrificed with been done wrong, I would argue, because to me, and I want to make really clear that this is not a policy issue, because you could have any congressional representative, if they were actually interested in the fate of small farms and local food, that could take up this legislation. And Massey was not the only one who did it. He had a Democrat congresswoman, I believe, who was co-sponsoring the bill. It's not a policy issue, though, because I don't purport to agree with anybody, let alone any politician, about everything. But for me, it's more of a character issue when you have somebody that, even though I disagree with the guy, there are not too many. There's nobody else in office. I mean, he was kind of the last stop on the rail line before it's just people that are getting paid to go and cast their votes and aren't really that invested in the outcome. And that's my somewhat black-pilled opinion. But the good news is that it's becoming more obvious, and as this stuff happens, it makes people start thinking differently about what needs to happen, because we're not going to vote our way out of this one. And that is not a veiled doom proclamation that has to do with violence and retribution. That's a literal statement of fact, given the reality on the ground, where you have somebody who's been in office for 14 years, voted with the GOP for over 90% of the time, and only deviated on a handful of small issues, and was a stickler for constitutionality, which isn't something that we should be complaining about, right? Constitutionality is kind of the thing that everybody likes to go back to when somebody's doing something wrong. It's like, oh, you shouldn't be doing that, it's not constitutional. But then when it cuts against what you're trying to do, then everybody's like, that document's 250 years old. Come on, give us a break. It's not that big of a deal. It's just for a little bit. It'll be fine. It'll blow over. And Massey was kind of a pain in the butt in that way. But all that notwithstanding, it's changed the conversation a little bit. And I think people are starting to understand that we're not going to vote our way out. And so that puts the onus upon us to do something about it, and to prepare and to get our own communities built up and shored up, and our own houses in order. And from that, I think that creates the opportunity for changes down the road. And I'm going to close the loop on that WD-40 analogy with the spare tire from earlier, because there's definitely, like, the solutions that everybody has. And when you talk about kind of hot button firebrand commentators, I know I listen to a decent amount of, like, the red pill folks and the groypers, and then there's kind of like the fence sitters. I can't really bring myself to listen to Tim Pool anymore, although I will be honest, I did go back to his coffee, because I have not found a better coffee. And yeah, that's the free market at work there. But I listen to a variety across the left and the right, but the vast majority of what you hear from people that are offering solutions or ranting about what needs to happen, the majority of that, it's short-term thinking. And the reality is, if you look at our enemies and you can draw that line and connect that dot to, there's a variety of enemies that we have and all over the place. All of the enemies that we have, the thing that makes them successful, because it seems like everybody who's an enemy of America and people of America who are concerned with and involved in really building and maintaining this culture, they seem to be pretty darn successful. And we're always playing checkers and they're always playing chess somehow. And I think that a lot of it comes down to the fact that we have been conditioned to have very short-term thinking. We're thinking in terms of who are we going to elect in 2026 that's really going to stick a finger in the eye of the GOP so they know that they shouldn't have screwed us with the way that Trump has kind of rug pulled everybody on just about everything that he ran on, with the exclusion of closing the border. He did a good job with that, but that's necessary but not sufficient. Ryan Evans says repeal the 19th Amendment. Interesting. Well, that's a conversation to have. But I'm going to address that in a little greater depth here momentarily. But the solutions that most folks have, it's short-term thinking. And voting for a different party, voting for a different candidate in 6 months, in 2 years, that's not what's going to change everything. And what needs to happen, and I'm not saying that I certainly don't have all the answers. I'm kind of looking at this from a big picture point of view with the focus on what can we do. Because there's one school of thought where people say, oh, you can't vote your way out of this one. Well, everything's going to hell in a handcart, and that's just the way it's going to be. Kind of the doomer black pill type of thing. And I choose to look at this maybe because of the fact that I have kids and I don't really have the luxury of just checking out from the conversation and just saying, well, it is what it is. It's been fun, guys. See you later. I tend to look at it from a more proactive position where I think that this level of corruption and manipulation is the baseline. It's the state of the world. Like, we are living in a fallen world that has been corrupt and degenerate for thousands of years. And there's always been, ruling classes who like to go to islands and eat all kinds of dried meat and stuff like that. There's been that stuff out there for a very long time. We just have cameras everywhere and people talking about it, so it's less under the surface and it's more in your face. And so on some level, there's no reason to give up hope. If anything, it's more of a cause to say, let's not be distracted by things that we can't control, and let's put our focus on doing the things that we can do and planting the seeds that are going to grow into the trees that we will not sit under their shade. And the one thing that I always come back to with farming, and I promise this all ties in together, and I will talk about repealing the 19th, since apparently that's what this stream is going down that path. And we will talk about weaning piglets, because I can connect all of these dots. I promise you. I'm going to do like a Jeff Goldblum in, what was that, Independence Day type of thing here. We'll make it all connect here, so just bear with me. But the whole purpose of farming is that it's a family endeavor. It's like, anybody that talks to you about farming from a standpoint, like, I always got to roll my eyes when I see the Joel Salatin videos. And I'm not going to go down a path about Joel Salatin, because I do have some critiques about some of his content, although him personally, I think his content is done by a team of kids that are trying to get clicks, and they're very successful at doing so. And so I'm going to kind of leave that critique to the side. But when I see the Joel Salatin videos where it's like, make X amount of dollars on X amount of acres, I'm always rolling my eyes, because it's like kind of clickbaity, trying to bring people into the conversation about how, farming can be profitable. And I understand that it can be, but there's a lot of subtext that most people are not engaging with. And the reality is that farming is a long game. And when you have a profitable farm, what you're not seeing is the parents and the grandparents and the great grandparents and how they started out, because great grandparents or great great grandparents, they started out with having to dig up all the tree stumps and having to chop down all the trees and make a space to put the animals. And then they got a couple of pigs and they got things going, but they didn't build a business off of that. They were still having to, work other jobs in order to make ends meet. They were just making enough, food for subsistence. And then the next generation got to build on top of that. And they put a layer on top of that, and they expanded, and they maybe bought some more land, maybe developed the land that they had further, maybe, and it goes from there. It's a multi-generational thing. So in order to be successful in farming, I like to talk about the marketing and the financial components of farming in some of my videos, because I think that if you have an eye towards the small business wisdom that I lack, frankly, because I've had small business before, or small businesses before, and varying degrees of success. Never had like a complete washout, absolute failure, but never quite enough success to make it where it's like, oh yeah, this is great. And I think applying some of that conventional wisdom about small businesses to farming, and then extending the timeline a little bit, it's an important part of the process. But part of that timeline with farming, it goes hand in hand with family, because the concept of like that. I made a video recently talking about Matt Walsh, or Matt kind of reacting to a Matt Walsh video where he's complaining about this farm in Idaho where the lady who runs the farm, she doesn't want to pay enough to her workers. And the way that that's supposed to go is that's supposed to be a family, and their kids are supposed to be working on the farm. And maybe dad goes off to work, mom does some work, takes in some work, and the kids are out there. And like, if you have enough kids, you have enough labor. And guess what? You're not paying them $60,000 a year plus benefits. You're giving the kids a place to live, you're giving them food, and they're getting healthy, and they're learning how to do basically an apprenticeship for what they're going to do when they grow up. And so the family model is a built-in business model that works when you have love and commitment and a family. And I know the whole discussion of marriage is a whole different ball of wax, but just bear with me. So in order to have changes in our system, it requires a long-term way of thinking that is committed to growth over the next 50 to 100 years, and expressly requires the consideration of building families with parents who are thinking about what they can position their kids to be successful in, rather than what many of us, I think, came up with, which was parents who were in an era of plenty, who said that the picking is great out there. There you got, money growing on trees. Get out there, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, kid. Like, what are you waiting for? And now it's like there was no maintenance done on the system. The system was great for a while, and then everybody was just like, okay, well, we ate all the animals. And it's like, wait a minute, we don't have any more piglets? What happened to the piglets? Well, we made bacon out of them, and it was delicious. And then we made some pork chops, and we had smoked a shoulder, and then we did that another couple hundred times. And it's like, yeah, but you were supposed to save some of those breeders so that you could continue having piglets, so that you wouldn't starve. And now here we are trying to restart the herd. And I think it's something that has to be, we have to go back to thinking about things in that multi-generational context, which is hard because it requires a social foundation and a social fabric that we are lacking because our attention span, as I started to mention, has been completely eroded, and our culture has become largely self-focused, hedonistic, degenerate, etc. And it's only in if we can kind of change that context that we're going to be able to change the outcome and the results. But it's not going to happen by voting for this one or that one. It's going to happen by people saying, you know what, let's focus on the people that I can, you know, drive 5-10 minutes and see those people. Let's get together, let's change some things, let's work together, and then make something that we can pass on to the next generation. All right. And I am going to get to the 19th Amendment thing here. Bolino's Bounty says, really got to focus on those local and state elections and ignore party affiliation. Amen. I will point out here that I know there are some people, and I will be perfectly candid, it's very tempting for me to be petty because when you hear Trump, and it's like a slap in the face hearing the way that he talked about Thomas Massey, when like Massey was the one guy that I really had some attachment to because of the fact that he's like the canary in the coal mine. He's not a vote that's going to be swinging, you know, making big changes, but he's that one little nail that wouldn't just get down and that everybody kept catching their sweater on when they would walk by the door, and it's just like whack, and there it goes. And hearing him talk about it in such self-aggrandizing terms, I really just want him to know that you really screwed up and you lost your base, and the people, like the polls that you're getting on Truth Social and whatever the, you know, boomers at Fox News are telling you, fake news, literally fake news. There's a tremendous amount of people who are all in for you that now are completely the other way. We are, because I was all in for Trump at one point, and some people want to argue with me about that as though like, what got you to this point? How could you be so dumb that you were all in for him? And it's like, well, you know, you got to play the hand that you're dealt, and when you're choosing from a couple different candidates, if somebody says this is what I'm going to do, well, I'd rather take a chance voting for the person who says that they're going to do what I need from them versus somebody who won't, you know, even pretend, you know. So I kind of want to be petty and just vote against Republicans on a federal level, which I know Nick Fuentes is big on that. And there's pros and cons to doing that because, but at the end of the day, yeah, I think, Mike, you're right. The local elections are really the things where it's going to change and where we have the opportunity to actually change conditions on the ground. And House Bill 396 here in New Hampshire is a perfect example of that, because if we're trying to influence federal regulations, I mean, it's been since 1967 that we've had the mandate of USDA inspection on a pound of bacon, whether I'm selling it to my neighbor 50 feet away or whether I'm shipping it out to somebody in California. That's been in place for that long, probably not going to change anytime too soon. But with state laws, we're able to actually make a meaningful change. And this is going to be a big, meaningful thing. This is going to mean new businesses, new people involved in stuff, people coming to this state who want to be able to like do farming and want to try to hang a shingle out and make a little bit of money. Yeah, I think it's going to be really good for the state in a number of different ways, but that is a result of action on a local level rather than trying to engage with the federal government that ultimately is just going to, you know, try to distract us, usually pretty effectively. They do a good job of it. The amount of times, just to continue with Mike's comment, the amount of times I hear, well, I didn't like the way we do X in Connecticut, but the moment I say, well, do you want to vote for the other party or third party options? The answer is always, well, the ones outside the state are nuts, so I'll keep voting for the same party or person that is currently complaining that they're complaining about. Yeah, it's tough to make. There's, you know, it's tough to get outside like the left right paradigm is a hard thing to break from. And I think that this is, in some ways, a necessary thing to have happen, because I've always been pretty hard right and pretty conservative in a lot of ways. But the last 2 years or so, pretty much since Trump was elected for his second go round, that has made me, it hasn't warmed me up to the Democrats, but it has definitely made me equally despondent and disgusted with the other wing on the same bird, if you will. And Fear Not Farm is here. Good evening to you. And just to circle back on the 19th, because Evan, or Ryan, I'm gonna talk about what you said there. I guess my whole plan, it involves families, and families maybe don't require legal marriage, but something resembling a more careful selection that's not done in like a temporary plastic sort of way, but something that is done with concern and with, uh, I mean, not to make it a business arrangement by any stretch, but with a compatibility element that's there that you're forced to really engage with. Because when you really become strident about your selection process, you find that that window, that scope narrows way down. And there's a lot of people that associate plenty with being the goal, where, well, I don't want to narrow down my scope. But the reality is, if you're going to get something that's good and that's going to last, it requires you to exclude everything else, but without being flexible on the things that really make it a lifelong endeavor. And again, I know there's, we could probably go on a few different rants, and I'm probably pissing people off, and I'm going to lose a bunch of subscribers for saying this, but this is just the way that I see it. And there's a lot of problems and a lot of the instability in marriage. And there's definitely things like feminism that you don't have to twist my arm to bring me around to saying that, yeah, that's done a lot of damage. And then on the flip side, there's also a lot of lack of focus and leadership in kind of the men's side of things, where it's like, oh, well, that's kind of the way they went, so we're just going to sit back and watch it all burn. And at the end of the day, like, there's, it becomes necessary for, like, it's got to start with, and those of you who know my channel a little bit, that I'm not shy about acknowledging the fact that I'm a Bible believing Christian. And I think that the order that we were created to be in, it's God over man, man over wife, wife over children, and there's order. There's order everywhere in the world. That's the point. There has to be order. But what happens is, when men say, oh, well, again, look at the creation story with Adam and Eve. When Eve went and ate the apple, Adam was like, oh, well, she made me do it. Then again, it's like the man who's supposed to be leading, he derelicts his duty, because it's like, oh, well, it's her fault and I can blame her and yada yada. And so off the rails we all go. And it requires both to be in alignment, and for men to be able to lead and be in order. And whether or not that means going to church and a specific religious thing is not my point or my focus, because I don't necessarily have a hard position on the nuts and bolts of theology and how people should worship. But at the end of the day, there's a big difference between the type of people who see themselves as being in submission to a higher authority, and the people that are just like, eh, I'm number one, I'm taking care of me, and everybody else can shove off. And you can see that, you can smell it a mile away. And there's a lot of people who, they have a higher purpose, and they understand that they are not there for their own benefit. Like, I love farming, I enjoy making money, but I am not here to serve myself. I'm here to serve God by doing and saying things that are going to be honorable. I fail a lot of the time, especially in YouTube comments. um, and I try to remember that just because it's online doesn't change the fact that it still counts. I can't be like, oh, that didn't count. Come on, I couldn't tell this person to go f themselves, because no, you still have to be kind, and you know, um, but like I'm here to serve. I'm not in authority over, the things and my family, and the things that are under my stewardship. I'm not in authority over them to be abusive and to please myself. And when you actually start to look at it from that perspective, you know which it took me a long part of my adult life to get to that point where I saw it that way. And when I started to see it that way, I realized this is not like, this is not kind of the, like, this is not a cream puff. This is not easy or fun. This means that now, like, I have way more pressure and I'm under the gun for everything that goes on. And, but at the same time, when you have support that is given, where you don't have to wonder, like, is this going to be okay? Are we going to fight about this? Is this somebody who's going to be pushing while I'm pulling, or like, but where it's like, okay, what are we doing? Okay, tell me what you need me to do, and we're going to get it done. Then it's a it's very difficult to describe. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, there's not a lot of content out there. Not that everybody should look to content on the internet to set normative standards, but it kind of does in some ways. And there's a ton of content where it's like men talking about how women are terrible, largely based around playing clips of women who are pretty terrible, and the men saying, see, look how terrible they are. Oh, be careful, there's a lot of terrible women out there. Oh man, come on, pull your head out, like, it's never going to work. Too bad. Oh well, at least you can, take advantage of the degeneration and the, depravity in our society, and whatever, will be fine. That's kind of what's out there. There's not a lot of, like, hey, you can do this. And then there's other, there's all kinds of coaches and, relationship experts or whatever, and I'm just like, you know I just scroll past, because I can't even with a lot of that stuff. But there is hope, but it's not at all a pie in the sky. And just to address, and I'm going to read the comments here in a second, I got off on a little bit of a rant, which happens, right? Hopefully you're understanding about that. Guys, if you haven't already, like the stream, because we need to wake more people up and they need to hear this kind of conversation. As a, we need to normalize this kind of cracking eggs of wisdom and knowledge on people, whether they like it or not. But there's, the big complaint that I hear from a lot of people in the red pill, kind of the doomer, black pill, black and red pill, I guess, groiper, the people that are the younger men that have kind of given up on marriage and family and all that, is like, oh well, it's kind of hopeless anyways. And so these Matt Walsh types that just tell us to go out there and get married, because there is an element which is largely boomer adjacent in their worldview, where it's like, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. I've got a big podcast and enough money to support a family and buy a house on my own without having to worry about, if I'm going to have to choose between my car payment and my mortgage next month. That just kind of wants to sell things as like, look, it's a quick fix, and it worked for me, buddy, it'll work for you too. And I'm not at all in favor of that or in agreement with that, because anything that you're doing in marriage, certainly I've done it well and I've done it poorly, um, and that's a decision that, like, we have to make every day. It is self-sacrifice, but it is mutually self-sacrificial. Like, you can't have one person sacrificing and the other person laying back and taking advantage. But when both people are self-sacrificial, you're not fighting each other and there's no friction. And then there's still lots of problems and work to do, and it's still hard and a pain in the ass, because you have bills and kids and jobs and chores and all this other stuff, but you're not fighting each other, and you never have to fight each other. And it's like, that is a thing. It does exist. And it's not, I'm not saying that I have the prescription to get people to that point, but I'm saying that that type of relationship and engagement can absolutely exist. But it also takes it takes willingness to lay your life down in order to be in authority. It cuts both ways. It's not, I'm the boss, you do what I tell you. It's, I'm laying my life down. And so I'm giving you everything that I have, and you give me everything that you have, and we put it together, and together we have a lot more. And so, but it's worth pursuing. And I would argue that without that, all of the, Nick Fuentes, let's all vote for the Democrats and teach the Republicans what's, we could stick a finger in their eye. That doesn't bake any bread. That's not going to do anything in the long term. It's not going to help. It's not going to fix. It's not going to change literally anything. What it's going to do is maybe give Nick the opportunity to position himself as, hey, I've got all these people that listen to me, so you better give me a position and pay me, and I'm going to be the kingmaker. Maybe that would be, which I think is what he's angling for personally. I mean, he's entertaining, but that's pretty much how I see him. Not that anybody cares or asks, but just putting that out there since we're on the topic. But unless it's something that is unsexy and takes a long time and requires a lot of hardship and sacrifice, then it probably is not something that's going to work. And I don't see a way that problems can be solved without a multi-generational approach, and that requires the family, and family requires commitment in order to happen. You can't follow the red pill Rich Cooper, guys in sports cars, where he talks about this is how to score with, women and not have to commit and get what you want and not make them get, that kind of manipulative nonsense. It doesn't actually build relationships. And the thing that always grinds my gears is people take so much advice from people who don't actually have successful relationships and families and kids. And families are literally the thing that, not to say that having a family, it's necessary but not sufficient. I mean, Ben Shapiro has a family, and I wouldn't exactly take life advice from him either. Anyways, rant paused for a moment. I'm going to hop in the comments here. All right. Ryan Evans says, uncomfortable reality that demographics are destiny. Yes and no. I mean, I agree with that somewhat, although I'm not sure if I agree with it entirely. I don't know exactly. I mean, that I need some more context for that. But at the end of the day, bigger families are going to be better for what we need. So I guess, there's we can at least agree on some of that, I think. Fear Not Farms is between this and the raw milk. I've learned that people truly believe that if they are allowed to sell custom processed or raw milk, that the big corporate farms are going to do the same. And I mean, that's one of the things. The problem is that there's far too many dumb people. Well, there's some truth to that. There are a lot of dumb people. But if you think about it, we got dumb gradually as a society, and we're not going to become, hunter-gatherers that are one with the world and elevated level of consciousness and able to, make tools and fix fences and wrestle alligators and stuff like that. It's not going to happen overnight, but we have to start. And I think the hardest thing for people to get over is the transition period, where it's we're going from spoon feeding and hand holding to, okay, this is not working. We're going to have to change what we're doing, and it's going to require some adjustments, and toes will be stepped on, and ultimately the adaptation will occur, but it's not going to happen overnight. And in the meantime, it's going to be at best uncomfortable, at worst, well, worse than just uncomfortable, and probably for a lot of people. But yeah, there are a lot of dumb people, but we need to start steering, we need to be steering things in such a way that we can guide people towards adaptation in a more intelligent, not intellectually intelligent, using bigger words intelligent, but more aware of, when you do this, it causes that for someone else. It's not just, I tell my kids all the time, this is my big life lesson. And as much as I rant about, the Zionists and the, Ben Shapiro, I feel like I am Larry David. Because the one thing I always tell my kids is if you go into the bathroom and you're the last one, and there's I don't want to come in to use the bathroom and be looking at cardboard. Like, if you use the last bit of toilet paper, you have to think, okay, this is the last of the toilet paper. You're taken care of, great. But there's somebody else that's going to come after you, and you have to have that intelligence about what's going on in the world to know that, okay, like, you got to take care of the other people in here, because in as much as we do that, there's, some, my brother calls it pragmatic leftism, which I'm not sure I'm on board with that definition, but that it's the general concept of, no empty rolls of toilet paper in the bathroom. But yeah, the big, at least as far as just to relate what you're saying with the raw milk, House Bill 396, and as far as I know, every other similar bill has strict parameters around the size and the amount of animals that you can run through custom processing. So it would be completely pointless for any of the big farms to do that, but it would be lovely for small farms. And the goal would be that small farms, while not the answer to everything, but small farms have to happen before you have big farms, because small farms grow and then they become medium farms, and then the medium farms grow and become big farms, and you have a cycle. And so anyways, I know you guys understand all of that. If you're not farm says, I probably won't ever vote again. It would have to be a genuine person like Massey, and good luck. Ryan says, I'm in Massachusetts for the foreseeable future anyway, so I'm screwed regardless. Well, what I would, not that you're asking for my input or opinion, Ryan, but I would say that, like, I was in Massachusetts at one point. I grew up in New York, and there's a lot more people that feel like you feel, and finding ways to build community locally, I think, is going to be a good thing. And obviously, what you're doing or focusing on as a community in your area, it's going to be different in different places with different groups of people. But to have some community is a really important thing, and to be thinking in a proactive way, not just like, okay, we get together, every week and, eat chicken wings and drink some beer, but actually, like, what's something that we can do? Because if you have a community of people who are not happy with the status quo, like, what's the smallest thing that we could do that would make a change in that, and then try to take steps towards that. But doing something and staying task oriented, I know in a survival sense, I was actually talking to a friend of mine the other day, actually the gentleman who taught me how to butcher here, and he moved out to Colorado, and he may be back actually one of these years. But anyways, he was asking me about some climbing stuff, and he sent me these pictures, because I used to be a rock climber in a former life. He sent me a picture of, these climbers hanging off a cliff on Portaledge, and he was kind of asking me some questions about how that stuff all works. And one of the things that I came back to over and over was that you kind of have to stay very small in your thinking. You have to stay locally focused, because if you're hanging over 1,000 feet of air under your butt and you're thinking, oh, I better not do this, or else, ooh, look at those rocks down there, 1,000 feet. I wonder what that's going to look like when they come to clean me off the rocks. Are they going to have to use a hose? Are they going to use a spatula? How are they going to do? Like, you let yourself go that way, then you completely come unglued and you can't function, and ultimately you're at much greater risk. But if you can just limit your vision and say, okay, what do I need to do to get from this place that's kind of precarious to that place where at least I have a better ledge and I can kind of take a break for a second? And it becomes that process, but repeated end to end multiple times, and you wind up on top of a mountain that from the bottom people are like scratching their head and saying, how did you do that? Well, that's how you do that. It's staying task oriented. It's the little things. And I'm not a survival expert. I'm no Les Stroud, although I enjoy Les Stroud, and back in the day watching Bear Grylls and some of his antics, although I actually enjoyed Bear Grylls more because I could kind of critique what he was doing, because a lot of it was just, stage nonsense for TV. But the thing that they always came back to, and I think there's a lot of truth to this, is stay task oriented. Don't just sit there and let things happen. If you don't have something that needs to be done, I remember Les Stroud specifically was very big on this. like develop routines and develop normalcy and make something to work on so that your mind is not left to just spin. Because when you have unoccupied minds, when you have people in society without a sense of purpose, like the idle hands are the devil's workshop. And we have a generation of people who, and I'm going to just draw some broad generalizations, the boomers before us kind of became materialistic and softened up because there was so much plenty that they didn't really have to have much in terms of a sense of purpose because there were so many new things. And I think some of that has trickled down to people in my generation. I'm a old millennial at 43. um, but a sense of purpose, like what are we here for, what are we doing, which you start to see that when you don't have people firmly strapped in mentally. There's a lot of rattling around back there in the bed of the pickup truck when we're driving down the road, and we have Gen Z and the other, whatever, the younger ones beyond them, where they don't really know anything. All they know is, well, we don't have the material comforts in plenty to keep us distracted, so what exactly are we supposed to be doing here? And we need a sense of purpose, and that's something that sometimes there's an element of having to create that intentionally, not just like to spin your wheels and stay busy, but to look for a purpose. Because and it's weird, I had a roommate in college who was like this, where he didn't really ever have anything that he was about. And he's like, you're always like into these things. How do you do that? I was like, I don't know. That's just the way I was brought up. It was like, you're expected to like just pick a thing and do it. When I was little, I was a ham radio operator, and my life became learning Morse code, building wire antennas, and like talking to people all over the world. And that was just kind of the thing that I did. And then it was soccer, and then it was climbing, and then photography and filmmaking. And now it's YouTube and farming. It's like the culmination of all of those pursuits have converged, and here we are while I'm ranting like a buffoon about like all of these topics that are all over the map. But that's what brought me here, and that's why I'm doing this stuff. And purpose, gotta have it. And for me personally, having my first child was a real, like, I always had some sense of purpose, but like the family component, when that really clicks, it kind of elevates the sense of purpose, even like where you think you have it buttoned up. And then when the family really grows and it becomes more than just you, then it's like there's even more momentum, and the snowball starts to roll, and you think about things differently. But let's see, Red Sky Responder. I'm enjoying the intersection of politics and farming. I'm on a long-term ag lease property, the arrangement of which could quickly flip on a dime as the political winds shift. Interesting. Fear Not Farm says 2020 proved the republic was dead. Massey's election was the death of democracy. Yeah, I get it. Bolino's Bounty says there's a divide between the sexes. And while I don't think it'll be a popular answer, I do think a lot of this boils down to not having faith. You can't have two people of the same faith, you can't have two people of the same faith simultaneously having a reason to hate one another, as you're both part of the shared value system. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I am going to put my oar into the water on the well, whatever. We're already kind of talking about Nick Fuentes. I promise we're going to talk about weaning piglets here in a little bit. Bear with me. This is like, I a lot of times, honestly, I don't know how to title the live streams, because sometimes there's an issue that I really want to talk about. Other times I sit down, I don't know what I'm going to say. I have some kind of broad points that I want to get into, maybe, but just stuff happens and stuff comes out. So here we are. I appreciate you guys being patient. But there's a kid that I listen to on here on YouTube. His channel is William, and he's kind of a, he's not like Nick Fuentes isn't actually that right leaning. He just says stuff in a really insulting way. And so everybody gets their shorts in a twist about it. But anyways, this kid is kind of in that crowd. He's Groiper adjacent. He's a Fuentes involved uh, commentator. And he said it in a very interesting way that to me really hit the nail on the head, and I think is along the lines, hey, Gio, good to see you here, buddy. Always nice to see you here on my streams. Things are starting to go in the direction of the nav type of content here, but I'm off on a bender, so I appreciate you being here. It's about to get interesting. But this kid William, his thing that he said that made a lot of sense to me, and I think aligns with what Bellino is saying, is that, like, I believe in a multiracial society, but not a multicultural society. And the two are used sort of interchangeably, and they kind of glom them together, but the two are very, very different. And I like that because to me, the idea of, like, there are people who focus an inordinate amount on complexion and the color of people, which I think is kind of missing the point of the culture being the central focus, rather than the specific genetic makeup of different people. And when we lose the ability to advocate strongly and effectively for our culture and to build that, then that's what leads to demoralization, which leads to breakdown in families, which leads to, like, reduction in concrete terms of families happening in the first place. And then it just kind of spirals downhill from there. And the irony is that I think a lot of people want to, like, a lot of people want to attribute and in order to have a culture that is shared, there is always going to be some level of what's the word I'm looking for? Hey, Lilo, excuse me a moment. The dog needs to come back in. Could you let the dog in, please? We got a new puppy, and she's very precious and cute, but well, she's actually pretty good. I want to give her a lot of credit. But in terms of, like, demographics and stuff, like, demographics are downstream from having a functional culture, because everything is going to have a, like, you're going to have a majority group of people in whatever nation you're in. Whether in Africa, that's going to be Africans. If you're in Europe, it's going to be Europeans. If you're in an Asian country, it's going to be somebody, it's going to be Asians. And there's always going to be that demographic leadership or majority, but it doesn't require universality. It requires just majority, and that there's a healthy cultural leadership that is taking place. And a lot of this, and I know, I don't know how much attention YouTube pays to this stuff, but I'm sure I could be banned for any number of what I'm saying or about to say, because I think this ties in with the same model of family and marriage, but on a much broader scale, that I already, kind of offended half of my viewership by saying just a moment ago. But, like, it's not about removing the people who are not like us, but it's about having leadership so that we're all kind of going the same direction. And I know this is I see a lot of similarities in farming, because you get to see groups of animals and competition and how this stuff sorts out. And so this is an analogy that I think makes a lot of sense. When I have 2 boars or 3 boars, if they're all big boars and they're all controlling a third of the population, and you put them together, you know what's going to happen? You're going to have a fight, probably to severe injury or death. And there's a reason why people don't keep their boars together. Now, I'm not saying that I've figured out a way to avoid any conflict between my different populations of animals, but what I have found that is really helpful is you have one big boar, and then you have 2 or more smaller boars. And if you introduce another boar to the mix, he has to be in a smaller size so that it doesn't upset the balance, and then that balance is maintained and the two are able to relate more or less like harmoniously. The big boar, he gets his choice of kind of who goes first and some of that stuff, but there's also a handful of smaller sows that the smaller boar is going to be much better suited for, and they work together, and it's more or less harmonious most of the time, even though, and even after they've both grown up and they're both big boars at that point, because they came up together with an order in place and a clear leadership and a clear dominance from a cultural standpoint. And that is, that makes a big difference. And you're able to have these potentially very adversarial factions together, but they're integrated into each other's environment in a way that actually makes sense. And there's some people, when you tell them that, it's like, oh, I never have two boars together. Even one boar is too much and yada, yada. But you have to manage correctly. And if you do that, then everything can work from there. But you can't have competition because that destabilizes everything in the same sense. And I didn't intend for this to all come out this way, but it kind of all works together. Like in the same way that a marriage, if you have competition between both spouses, it is going to be a nightmare and you are not going to get anything done. You're going to lose your ass and you're going to hate each other no matter how much love and attraction was there. But like if there's an order so that, okay, we might have conflicts, but there's an order to resolve the conflict without it turning into, hey, let's go and duke it out until somebody is, expired, right? Then you're able to solve problems, and the amount of functional harmony is mind-blowingly amazing. And I think that the same principles, broadly speaking, apply, like what I see on the farm. I think it kind of applies with people. It's just hard to do because a lot of the demographic and cultural shifts that have taken place in our society, they didn't happen naturally. They didn't happen because, like, oh, everybody just kind of showed up here. Like if you look at the last 10 million some odd people that came into the country, it's not like, when was it the early 60s, I think, when Eisenhower was trying to limit the, folks coming from Mexico. I know what that operation was called, and don't try to, get me to get banned here on YouTube. But like when that whole thing was going on, it's like, okay, it makes sense. We have neighbors and they need to come and, or there's a reason why they're here. It's not like when you have billionaires like George Soros and the other bozos that, that have been funding boats where people are coming from the other side of the world. And it's like, wait a minute, you don't have, two nickels to rub together, but yet you made a treacherous and expensive, round the globe journey to get here. That's not like a normal, process of osmosis, right? Like that's a forced deviation from the norm that's meant to disrupt a culture and a society, and it's bad for everybody. Because when you take people and you promise them a better future and all of this good stuff, and then you inject them forcibly into an environment that is not in a position to be able to accommodate them, then everybody is kind of like, hey dude, like get out of here. Like, what are you doing? We don't, and it's very uncomfortable and awkward. And there's people that wind up kind of getting caught in that where it's like, oh, they said it would be good and we came here and we showed up and now it's not. And like, now what do we do? Because it costs however much. Hey, Ginger, don't do that. She's going to chew up the paper towel. I guess it's going to be what it's going to be. So anyways, yeah. Fear Not Farm says, I work every day with Boomer who has no children, no family to leave his 60-acre ranch to, and he cannot see anything wrong with Trump. He can't see anything wrong with the data centers. I have a couple of folks like that on Facebook, And it's the people that are like, oh, come on, it's just, this needed to be done 50 years ago, but Trump's doing it now, and it's okay because, hey, it's just a little bit of a hiccup in the gas prices, and since you people couldn't decide whether you were boys or girls, Trump decided to do it for you. So pull yourself up by your bootstraps and deal with the gas prices. And it's like, oh my goodness, come on. Yeah, unfortunately I'm familiar. Bryson says the problem is people refuse to acknowledge that some cultures are better than others. I don't know if that's the problem, because I think that the people who are involved with artificially injecting outside cultures, it's not necessarily even a better or worse. Bear with me for a second, because I'm not taking the piss here. Like, it's not necessarily about better or worse. It's about in the right place, in a place where it makes sense. Like, there are parts of the world where certain cultures are much more compatible. And so when you put that, again, here we go with another analogy. It's like Idaho pasture pigs. Good evening, Craig. We are going to talk about weaning pigs, I promise, but it's perfect to see you here, since I'm going to make an analogy at the expense of the Idaho pasture pigs. Like, if you put an IPP, which is a very forage based and sort of a slower growing pig with different genetics that prioritize more of a forage and pasture rich environment, you put that pig in a commercial pen where they have nothing but grain, and there's not a blade of grass that pig in a commercial operation is going to see throughout its entire life, except it might catch a glimpse of a blade of grass when it gets loaded onto the truck. Like, the Idaho pasture pig in a commercial operation is going to be a disaster. It's going to get fat. It's not going to benefit the producer. And so you could look at that and say, oh, this is a worse pig. And many people do say that. But then when you have somebody that has a decent amount of land, has the ability to graze and rotate the pigs on different plots of their property, and is planting the right forage and the cover crops, and the pig is able to eat like a fourth of the grain that one of those commercial hogs will eat, and they're very easy to keep, and they improve the land and all these other good stuff, and the meat is delicious. So then they work beautifully in that system. But the thing is, when you're trying to force a square peg through a round hole, that creates a disparity. And naturally, what we see is just like, look, we're in this system, and this is what's being jammed down our throat. You're bad. You don't work. No pun intended. Get out of here. And the reality is, there are cultures and systems that work differently than ours. And I'm not reticent about saying that I am a unapologetic advocate for our culture and our system as it should be, not the current phony crony capitalism that is, it's like, what are we conserving as conservatives, right? Like, there's nothing really left to conserve. But I think that one of the things that makes it hard to get momentum behind the conversation about demographics and about the order, and that's what all this stuff really comes down to, it's the order within our society. People are there are groups of people who are in control of certain things within our society who have a problem with and are constantly working to undermine the order, whether it's from the left or from the right. Everything that they're doing, it's always trying to like remove the constraints, remove the order. Now, we could break this down on a very spiritual level and go back to the Garden of Eden, and the whole message of the serpent in the garden from the very beginning was, what's the big deal? Like, this guy's an old fuddy-duddy. He's just trying to ruin your fun. Come on, take a bite. No big deal. Do what you want. The rule of the whole of the law is do what you will. That's the premise of the Church of Satan. Do whatever you want. No structure, no order. Hey, whatever. Let your hair down. And look at all the cultural degeneration that really began in earnest during the 1960s with the drugs and the feminism and the degeneracy. And it went both ways. It was men and women. It was all over the place. It was just this big crock of just the hell with any kind of order. And anybody who says anything about keeping any order, they're a bunch of squares. And of course, you have the luxury of being able to do that when you're back in the 60s and everything is on booming post World War II, and you have all this money coming in. You can still come down off your acid trip, assuming that you didn't choke on your own vomit or choke on a ham sandwich like Mama Cass. And you can still get a good job, make a bunch of money, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, and off you go. And yeah, so that's kind of like, it's all about undermining order. But a lot of the conversation about what order should we have within our society, within our properties, within our homes, within our relationships, it's hard to get to sell that, because a lot of the language either is or seems or feels very hostile, which is like kind of like, hey, you don't belong in this system, get out. And the reality is that if you fix the order, the out will happen on its own over time, but it's a multi-generational thing. It's not something where you just like cut the arm off and let it bleed. You have to arrange it and do it properly. I know this is a deeper topic than what I'm doing justice to, but I did work the IPP in there. Good evening to John, UK. Wow, I'm worldwide. We're global, reaching around the globe. What age do you castrate your piglets? So we are going to talk about castrating and weaning, and I'm going to get to that in just a moment. But in short, it depends. That's really the answer, is it depends on a handful of things. I've tried doing the castration when they're like a day or two old. I've tried leaving it to like much too long, where I meant to do it at 8 weeks and 8 weeks turns into 12 weeks. Not fun, but I've done it. So there's a few different ways to do it, and you kind of have to pick your poison. Got a super chat from GeoGasser. Thank you so much, sir. We are actually, I did set a goal that when we get 5 super chats, I'm going to host a meetup. And I can't pretend like I'm not going to host a meetup anyways, because I want to do a meetup with you guys. A couple breweries here in across the river from me in Vermont that I work with to get some spent grain and distillery mash after they're done using it. And I'm working with them to set up an event. So, but I am kind of putting that out there to encourage super chats, because that helps us keep doing what we're doing. So Geo says, clever analogy, not to wear a tinfoil hat, but did you know that the elites refer to law enforcement as our dogs? Maybe they're introducing the big boar. No, I did not know that. That's how they reduce the thing. I didn't know that that's how they refer to law enforcement. Although I think that during the pandemic, at least to me, and I've always been very tinfoil hat, technically aluminum foil hat adjacent, because I grew up in a religious cult, and they were talking about like the end times since the 1970s, before I was born, and I kind of grew up listening to a lot of that stuff. And it wasn't like crazy, weird, abusive snake handling cult or anything like that, but I had a pretty good grasp on the book of Revelation from the time I was, knee high to a grasshopper. And so a lot of that stuff that I heard back in the early and mid 80s, it's like, oh yeah, this all checks out. This is what I've been hearing this my whole life, so here we go. But during the pandemic, kind of, there was a couple of things that happened in New York where I remember hearing about a bar that got shut down, and the cops came and busted it, and how they had to bring in outside cops to deal with the non-compliant citizens who were too invested in their, living normal life and not having the government impinge on everything. It became really obvious that the term bootlicker was kind of popularized around those group of people who were just, they had no concern for their community, no concern for the Constitution, which is kind of broader than your individual community. But even that, there was just like all kinds of stuff like that going on. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that that's what they're doing. And I think that there's a series of elements and things that are, they can't just bring in one big boar to upset the apple cart. It's a series of, it's like Seinfeld says, when you're knocking over or you're stealing from a vending machine, you can't just tip it over. You got to rock it back and forth a few times before it goes. And I think that's been the case. And you can see the rocking back and forth, like the guys got together in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and you have the Standard Oil and the Chase and Morgan and all the rest of these bozos that now, like, those names are like household names that control everything, or did at one point. And of course, they've been doing this for a long time. So it's not just like they've been setting up the dominoes for a while. And so ultimately, that's part of the reason why I don't put my hope in politicians or in voting our way out of things. It's like, people may say, oh, that's tinfoil hat stuff. Why do you believe in, end time stuff? Why do you believe in all this crazy, outlandish nonsense? It's like, well, when you look around at the people who are on the, call it, for, oversimplification, but the bad side, they certainly believe in all this stuff. They believe very ardently. They are very devout. And they've been doing this for a very long time with very little slippage in, kind of, it's been passed generation to generation to generation over millennia in one form or another. And they put different labels on it. Like, they brand it differently. It's like whether they call it this secret society or that secret society, or religious groups or cults, or however they want to do it. It kind of shape shifts, but it's ultimately the same thing, which is, how can we undermine the order in order to take advantage for ourselves in inordinate ways. And that's kind of been the game plan, like, literally since the first chapter of the book. And that's exactly what's going on now. And it's not happening by accident. This is the game. So yeah, interesting comment. Let's see. Fear Not Farm says, I was talking to him and another boomer. We're back to the boomers here. Said, build a dam across the Strait of Hormuz. We have plenty of oil. While we were also talking about the lack of refineries, I said, yeah, well, if you don't let trade happen on the strait, millions of people die, millions and millions. And they just kind of shrugged. And I think it kind of goes back to what you're saying. They're totally consumed with themselves and their own consumerist values. Yeah, been distracted. They kind of bought that whole deal. And kind of rolling this in, Fear Not Farm says, I mean, I hear you on the culture thing. Don't get me wrong. I think our culture is better than many people, including cultures within our own country. But I think cultures work well. Yeah, works well. It's about compatibility. And you have to be able to advocate for yourself, take your own side, as Fuentes always says. You got to take your own side. But at the same time, there's also a certain amount of indifference that I think we would be best, like, that's some of the reason why, like, this live stream, for whatever reason, has basically been the opus magnum, whatever. It's been kind of like the underlying premise of why I do everything and kind of how I approach things and farming and relationships and my big plan. This is my 30,000 foot window into the 30,000 foot view of Rowan Ridge Farm. So I'm sorry and congratulations. Subscribe to the channel if you agree. And I'm sorry, well, if you don't, you probably aren't still here. So we don't have to worry about that at this point. But yeah, you got to be able to take our own side and advocate for ourselves, but the detachment can be a problem. And one of the big things that makes farming necessary, beyond just the obvious thing that people need to eat, although people can eat with factory farms, but what you lose with that is farming forces you into a position that you are connected to other people and other things, not the least of which is your community and your fellow man. And so you see what people are going through when the market takes a hit, and you have a buyer who's like, I can't afford to buy piglets from you, or I can't pay you this much because I only have that much. And it also connects us with life and death, because you're literally making decisions that, not just in the obvious component of slaughter, which is part of it, and sacrificing a life for, animal gives its life so that people can have their life, but we spend our time of our life sacrificing, and money, which represents time and life, we sacrifice that so the animals can have a comfortable existence and be well taken care of. So it's like there's an inherent connection to each other and to the world and to natural processes that I think point the way very clearly to the one who made all this stuff, and kind of what his plan is. When you actually stop and like step back a little and you look around, it's like you can see there's a pattern here, there's an order to all of this stuff that you don't notice when you're just going to the grocery store and chucking a pound of bacon from Smithfield into your cart and going home to watch Netflix. There's a connectedness there, and the value of human life and the sanctity of human life. Every time I have a litter of piglets, I got 27 piglets, thank God, from these 3 litters. I guess that's an average of 9 apiece, which is good across the board. But it breaks my heart every time I see a piglet that's like circle in the drain, and I know like this is it, like they're not gonna make it, and I'm connected to that life because of what I have to put in. And I would imagine the same goes for a lot of you guys as well. And it's an opportunity to be connected, and rather than just disconnecting and saying, oh, we got it good, so screw everybody else, actually caring about what works better for everyone else. And I think that, again, focusing on compatibility rather than absolute cultural supremacy or not, but rather saying, this is where it makes sense. And if you establish one culture, kind of seems like we did that with the whole Constitution and that whole thing. You establish a group that builds a culture, and that culture has a magnetic gravitational effect that brings some in, and then there's others that it repels, because the strength of that attraction does not fit for them. And so there's those people that they have no interest in coming here because they're doing their own thing, their own lifestyle, their own culture, all that stuff. It's repulsive to them, and as it should be, which is why we don't need to go and like convert them into our way of doing and thinking about things, and they certainly don't need to come here and convert us. And we need to just leave everything, like, you build a culture that works and everything organizes around that if there is order in place. And on that note, that's my oversimplification of all the cultural red pill relationship. I've kind of ticked everybody and all the items off the agenda that we could possibly talk about. But I do want to wind down, although obviously, you guys are still here in the chat, so I'm open to more rabbit trails. Let's talk about weaning piglets. I'm going to change the thumbnail for this live stream because I got some really nice pictures of my sows in the barn with light hitting them at just the right time. And oh, I didn't see that. John says, we used to do ours at about a week old. I used to be a pig manager for 150 sows. Wow, that is busy work. Retired now, thank God. Yeah, no kidding. That's 150 sows. That's a lot. I have like 30 sows. Well, technically about 15 sows, 15 gilts, and some of them are probably going to go to sausage, but that's a lot. And I got to thin some of the gilts out because I'm going to kind of let them have a litter, see how everyone does, and then use that to try to narrow our breeding stock down to the ones that give us the most bang for the buck. But to keep them going over time, that's a lot of effort. So that's pretty good. Yeah, the topic of weaning and castration. This question actually came from Secret Noise Pictures, Craig, who asked me during the week. Kind of, we got talking about his pigs, and he's talking about getting them weaned. And I believe he had said that they kind of were a little bit overdue, because as often happens, life kind of gets in the way, and you want to have them off of mama, but it's like, well, I'll get that next weekend. And in the meantime, it's not great, but they're going to have to stay in there. And so you kind of have to roll with the punches and do the best that you can to keep everything working together. But typically, and I kind of started thinking about the discussion of weaning the piglets and when that should happen and how that should happen, because there's different schools of thought. And John, if you have some guiding wisdom here on this, I would be interested to hear this, because you obviously have more experience than I do. But what I have heard and what I have done is pretty much anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks is when, like at 6 weeks, I'm considering the possibility of weaning, depending on how everything is looking. So I'm not going to look any earlier than that. And the reason why this all kind of came up in my mind was because I had some piglets that I got from someone else as like replacement piglets for the ones that I had lost, because I still have to fill those orders. And this person had some, again, life got in the way, and he kind of had to get them out of there quickly. And he sold them to me. And so he weaned them at like 5.5 weeks. So they were solidly eating, pellets. They were eating grain, but they were still very, I would not have weaned them at that age, not just because of their size, because they were still quite little, but also their digestive system is not quite up to the task. And so they all have the scoots. And then I'm putting potato starch in the feed, which is just like, looks like creatine powder in with the pellets. And then that kind of solidified their stools after a little bit. But, and I wound up keeping them for a few weeks and got them going, got them up to speed. And by the time they were, around 7, 8 weeks, they were still a little smaller than what I would consider average, but not like remarkably so. Not enough to where anybody would say, oh, what's going on with these pigs, type of thing. And it occurred to me that because I kind of live inside of a bubble when it comes to the pigs, like I have my own way of doing things with my own animals. I don't buy feeder pigs from other people, so I don't know what's normal when other people get feeder pigs from other farms around me. I kind of do it my way, and it's like I have a certain standard of how I want my animals to look and feel and to act. And if they're meeting that standard, then I'm gonna age. Oh boy, this could go a few different ways, but age is just a number. And so my thing is, I want them to meet the standards that I have rather than meet the schedule that I would like. Because obviously, if you can wean piglets 2 weeks earlier, you can dry the sow up, which means she's eating half as much food. Also means she can get back in condition sooner because she's not losing body fat, because she's expending calories to feed the piglets, which means that she can get rebred sooner, which means that you get another litter, which means that you make another, however many, let's say, $1,500, $1,200 coming off of her. So it's like when you add up, basically that quick turnaround is the difference, give or take. That takes real tight management, which I will be candid and tell you, I don't manage my pigs that tightly. And so that's kind of the difference between 2 litters a year and 3 litters a year on average, right? If you're really cutting, as slicing that margin as thin as you possibly can, you can get 3 litters a year out of them, but you have to avoid having any kind of inertia in the system slowing things down. It has to be really buttoned up. The nutrition has to be top quality. You're not goofing around adding whey to low soy feed because, well, I could save a buck using brewer's grain. It's like the nutrition has to be top level. The supplements and the vitamins and all the nutritional stuff has to be squared away. And then that way they are staying in good condition and not being too fat. And the reason why my answer to the question of when to wean it usually comes down to what a combination of what the babies look like and what mama looks like. And I have started to co-farrow sows together, ideally not like where they're in labor together unless there's a quite a big space. Like I have two sows that are in together and they've always been friendly to each other. Like they've always been kind of wound up together and they're not like, some sows you put them together, maybe you don't, but I've had some sows where they're just nasty and their own sister. They'll always bite her ear, bite her tail, or like, smash her out of the way at the dish. But these two, they were pretty good tempered towards each other, so I put them in together. They look almost similar, they look like they could be related, and they don't share any ancestry whatsoever in common. But they're in there, and they each have about 10 piglets. But when you have co-farrowing happening, it enables you to sometimes, or like what I'll do other times, if I have a small litter, like or I have one mom that kind of crapped the bed and didn't do good with her piglets, maybe she only has like 3 or 4 piglets, I'll put her in there with her 3 or 4 piglets, and then that way, instead of 2 sows having 10 on each, you can kind of spread those out across 3 pigs, and the different sows, they usually do it no problem. I've never had any problem with sows attacking piglets. I've grafted piglets from one litter onto another, and usually the first night the mama is like, wait, what's going on here? And sometimes she's a little bit like barking at them, but by the second day all the graftees have done fine. And so what I'm looking at is if mama's in good enough condition and if she's able to keep producing milk and isn't getting sucked dry to where her hip bones are sticking out, and the genetics that go along with this are something that I'm not going to pretend to understand or have a good line of indication of, like, this is how it's a good. I mean, I think the maternal characteristics and traits, they all kind of go together, and some of you guys might have different experience, but I believe that the maternal traits are passed through the male line, the male genetics, and that's not just the temperament with the babies and like the awareness so that they're not squashing the babies, but it's also um, their ability to produce milk like crazy, to really milk well, and then also to be able to be efficient with their body fat and their calories so that they're producing a good amount of milk, but they're also not dropping weight and getting out of condition. Because I have some sows where, while they can, nurse a big litter for a good long time, when they come out of that, it's like, that 1,000-yard stare and the sunken hollow cheekbones and the hip bones. You can see the points in their on their hip bones sticking out. And there's others, like I had 2 old spots this winter. One of them had a litter in like early February, late January. The other one had a litter like a month later. And the piglets were all in there together, and pretty much the second one, who had like weaned her or had her litter later, sorry, a little tongue twister there, I wound up weaning her babies off of her and letting her go back in with the herd, and I put her babies back on the mama who had already been milking for like 2.5 months because she was doing great. I pulled her babies off of her because they were more than ready to go. I put these other ones on her, and they were both they're both old spots, so it wasn't visually, it didn't look much different, and she did fine. She didn't get worn down. Plenty of milk. Babies grew out. Off they went. So the mama's ability to sustain that kind of milking and lactation is a big part of it. Part of it too that I also look at is the temperament. So in certain situations where I'm a little bit dragging my feet to wean the babies, when the babies get big enough, I've had a bunch of moms that'll do this where they're just like, okay, see ya, I'm out of here. You guys are a pain in the butt. And they'll just break the gate or go through the electric fence, depending on, pasture or wherever. But they're just like, yeah, we're not sticking around for this anymore. Um, and it's funny to watch them because I think that sometimes you can get a little bit overzealous about weaning the pigs at an early age because you see the piglets eating out of the bowl. But I don't think that is the right, like when they start to eat out of the bowl or they start to eat the solid food, what have you, I don't think that's the right time to wean. Generally speaking, when I am going to start weaning, it's when I notice the mom flipping the babies with her nose out of the dish. And I have seen some moms huck some babies that are like, pretty good size. And like they're flying for a second through the air and then they come down and they bounce up and then they go back and do it again. But like when there's starting to be competition for that food bowl to where they're willing to go and toe to toe with mom to get to be eaten out of the dish, then to me that's the indicator. And it happens at different ages. I've had some where it happens earlier, some where it happens later. But from the piglet side, that's really what I'm looking for. It's their ability to eat competitively, because at that point, they can get all of the calories that they need from their grain. And the additional benefit of keeping them on the tit, it's not going to be that great because they could just go and get the same amount of calories out of the feeder. So why bother putting mom through all of that? But the goal is to get the piglets maximum nutrition without overburdening mom or making her wait too long, and also without weaning them too quick because you want to take care of mom, but then you wean them too quick and they can't really get an adequate amount of calories out of the feeder and the grain. And so then they're kind of lagging a couple of weeks behind, and you make runty piglets because you get a little bit anxious and you wean them too soon. So, as with most things, I think the answer is it depends. And there are some people that swear by doing it with 6 weeks. And I think that when you have a very highly and well managed system, you probably can skew your weaning dates for earlier. And also, a lot of this comes down to management and selection. Puppy's back there. Hey, Ginger, come here. Hang on a second. Let me get Ginger here. You guys got to see her. She's a sweetheart. Come on, make a cameo appearance. Give the kids a treat. Ginger, oh, come on. Hang on, bear with me. It's going to be worth it. Come on, Pop. Come on. I'll let you sit with me on stream. I don't give that honor to just about anybody. Okay. There we go. Yeah, so a lot of that, it's going to come down to, watching the babies, and like if you make the right selections, I think you can develop breeders that are more that are going to wean their piglets earlier based on the way that they lactate. And so a lot of it comes down to management over time. But that takes a lot of time. And that's the thing that I think people don't realize is how much time it takes to really develop your genetics so that you have mamas that will be profitable because they wean bigger litters sooner, and you can safely get 3 litters a year out of them without putting them out too much or, making things difficult for them. And where they get the babies, big enough where the babies grow well enough and they can nurse them well enough, and the two kind of work in hand, and it become where they're compatible that way. But that takes a lot of time to select and breed and rebreed and eliminate and cull in order to develop that. And the same thing then also goes with those same selections that you have to make in order to develop a good carcass. And so it's like you're trying to hit a moving target on the back of a horse at like 400 yards with like a slingshot. So good luck, right? Because you have to figure out, okay, who's got the best meat genetics, and then out of the best meat genetics. And I think the goal, the way I would describe it, is to narrow down one thing at a time and don't try to have too many variables to make a perfect animal all in one shot. I think, like for me, the things that I am selecting for at this point, okay, this is Ginger. Isn't she precious? Oh, what a good puppy. Say hi. 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 All right. She's a sweetheart. Okay. Sorry, sweetie. There you go. The main thing that I try to select for right now is the maternal stuff because that's more obvious. I can get a pretty good idea if I have a mom who's maintaining good condition, who's weaning big litters. I can do that pretty easily, whereas the meat quality takes a little bit longer time and a little more follow-up to really connect the dots on that. So if I have profitable sows that are making babies reliably, then I can bring another boar into the mix to then make sure that those consistent and profitable good mothers then are being serviced with genetics that are going to add the carcass quality onto that. And then I know I have both, but you have to pick one and really focus on that one thing. And that's kind of my strategy at this point. Fear Not Farm says, my IPP boar is very patient with piglets. Yes, all my boars are really good with piglets. I haven't had any issue. Like the boars are the ones that people always worry about with the piglets, but they're the ones I worry about more, the mamas, because they actually get much more aggressive with the babies if they're somebody else's baby. Fear Not Farm says that is actually one of my favorite things about pigs is how sows will interchangeably raise each other's piglets almost always. Yeah, it definitely helps to distribute some of the burden, because sometimes there's some moms, like the moms that I had that did really bad this winter. They each had like a baby or two, and they kind of were just like, all right, I'm over it. Like, I'm not going to stick around and do this. They wanted to go out and live their best life. So I just weaned their babies. I pulled their babies. They were like a day or two old. I pulled them off they had gotten colostrum from their moms, and I just put them in with other sows, and they, weaned them out, no problem. Bryson Speck says, it's that common for little pigs to get squashed. Our cows will step on their calves, but it's super rare. Yeah, unfortunately, it is pretty common. Some of it depends on the context. So if you're using farrowing crates, and you always see this on like the vegan pages where they have these pictures of, oh, good night, Greg. Red Sky Responder is out. Hawaii signing off. Well, appreciate your time here, and thank you. Appreciate you being a member with us. Yeah, piglets do get stepped on fairly. I mean, it's a thing. Like, it happens every litter. There's at least one or two that are going to get squashed almost always. Like, if I have a litter where nobody gets squashed, that is something that I'm like, it's like, whoa, that's impressive. Normally, there's going to be at least one. And part of the reason for that, well, there's a lot of different reasons for it, but basically, in order to avoid that, you have to constrain the sow until the piglets are old enough that they are able to move around and be big enough and agile enough to where they're not having to worry about getting stepped on. So the farrowing crates, you see them in like the vegan propaganda about like, oh, this is how these pigs live their entire lives, and it's a sow like confined in this little crate, and the idea of the crate is pretty much you can stand up and you can sit down and you can roll over, but it's like a body length long and a body width wide. Sow goes in there, there's water at the front and feed, and they poop and shovel that out into the into the gutter. It's very not pasture friendly. Um, and there's different opinions on these. I've never used farrowing crates, so I don't have a strong leaning on it. I've picked my share of dead piglets out from underneath mamas that were given a big area with lots of room and freedom to live their best life and be their most regenerative self, with all the hay and all the sand and this and that. Like, I've picked out so many dead piglets that it's hard for me to accept the people that act like it's an ethical failure to use a farrowing crate on a sow in order to, yeah, it keeps her more or less immobilized, casually immobilized for a couple of days so that the babies can get off to a good start and they don't get mashed. And, but setting that up and managing that, you have to have everything, your management has to be at that level in order to make that work. And my management, I'm opting for a different, I'm coming at it from the other way, where basically I want to have less involvement and less management, and I'm doing more breeding to get animals that will do it themselves so that I don't have to, because I can't, because I'm not here all the time, and I don't have the money to get farrowing crates and to put in the, you know, sewage system and the heating and the water and all the rest of that stuff that goes with it to really properly care for them while they are in that kind of a management intensive environment to be in a farrowing crate. Because at the end of the day, it would cost, like, you're weighing the costs. It would cost a lot more to put that stuff in, but you would reliably be weaning. Maybe you might lose one piglet a litter. At this point, I would say the good moms tend to lose like maybe 2 to 3 a litter. And so if they're doing, you know, 14, 12 to 14 babies and you're weaning 9 to 11, that's a good solid mom. And then there's some that they'll do smaller litters, but they'll wean 100%. And usually what happens, at least in my experience, with those litters that wean at 100%, they have bigger babies. And this is probably a product of my overfeeding them. So they actually have, like, in humans, this is something that is concurrent with type 1, well, with type 1 or type 2 diabetes, because what happens is they're eating more carbs, makes their insulin level go up. Insulin is like the king anabolic hormone. And so that builds. So when the babies are eating, they're basically on steroids and they're growing bigger, thicker, heavier, fatter while they're in utero. And then when they come out, that can make for complications in the farrowing process. The flip side of that is if they come out okay and mama is okay, and again, we're a lot of ifs, ands, buts, a lot of moving parts, and we're kind of threading some needles here. But if mama is okay, when you have those bigger babies, and a lot of times the smaller litters also bigger because you're not splitting those calories. Like my one purebred Burke sow, she had was it 14, and the other one had like 12. Like, when you got 14 babies on board, those calories got to go they got to be enough to go around. And so you're not having, everybody's, there's only so many calories, right? When you have 7 babies and you got half that number of piglets, the piglets that are there, they're going to be getting more calories per animal. At least this is my assumption or estimation, the way I make sense of it, because the smaller litters, bigger piglets. When you have bigger litters, smaller piglets, because all that, you know, has to stretch. But then because they're smaller, they're also a little weaker. They're a little less lively in some cases. This time of year, even the smaller ones still quite lively, very good survivability, very good vigorous babies, and good, careful, slow moving, conscientious mama. But still a couple here and there that get squashed. And I think that part of that is when you have 12 tits and 14 babies, that there's going to be one or two that keep not getting to eat. And as a result, they're getting weak, fatigued, which, excuse me, which makes them a prime candidate for getting pancaked. And then it happens that way. So there's only a certain amount of good mothering that good mamas can and will do and tolerate, you know. Fear Not Farms is not an ethical issue for me with farrowing crates, but I'd say picking good mamas is the best case because you add value to your breeding stock. Yeah, totally agree. And I think that, I mean, farrowing crates don't replace the need for good selection, but it does cut you a wider margin so that you can still get away with, you can still make more money off of not quite as good. Whereas without a farrowing crate, there's a lot less middle ground. It's kind of like the very good and then everybody else. And sometimes everybody else, sometimes they get lucky and it's like they do great on the first one, and then after that it's kind of like, you know. But yeah, that's kind of my logic with the weaning. I don't have anything else that I really look at. It's a combination of, I look at mama's condition on her side, and if the babies need it on their side. And how I assess that is competition over the food bowl. If babies are competing for solid food and mama is starting to fight with them and compete with them as actual, not really as equals, but kind of like at the food dish, that means they're not babies anymore. They're ready to go. And the more economical, the more economical food choice for them at that point is going to be with grain. And then you can, return mama to good condition. Sometimes I'll put them right back into breed if they're in good enough condition, probably to get the best result with breeding. Let them skip a cycle and fatten them up a little bit more. They call this flushing, where you get them lots of nutritional restoration happening, and then that kind of signals to the reproductive system that, hey, we have resources here, let's make some babies. And then that next time that they cycle, they have more pregnancies that will implant, and you have a higher receptivity. There's a lot of tricks that I have heard about that I still haven't had a chance to implement, because again, it takes management. And a lot of times it's like, okay, I'm going to manage mom to get out of where the babies are, and then that's going to be it. And then the other thing too that I should also touch on is the actual mechanics of weaning. And this is not super complicated. There's different ways of doing this, and everybody can kind of put their oar in the water if you guys have different ways of doing this than I do. But the way I tend to do it, you saw if you watched the video where I was giving ivermectin and giving medications, any kind of injections, I try to time anything that I'm doing, including castration, around mealtime, because at that point, mama is distracted, babies' mouths are full, and you can sneak in, grab a baby by the hind leg, and you can be in and out of the pen before mama realizes what's going on, and baby's got a mouthful of feed and they're still chewing and they haven't started hollering yet. So you have a little bit of window to get in and get out. And again, if you have good infrastructure, which I would say is, certainly one of the best things to have with any kind of animals, but especially with pigs, you build it so that there are areas where you can lure the babies to these areas where mama does not have access. And you can kind of do something like that. One of the things I do down on the pasture, I have a tubular, like a tube gate, 2-inch steel tube, and I have kind of hog panels on the sides and the tube gate facing the pigs. So what I can do when it's time to wean the piglets, before I dump feed in the yard to everybody or on the pasture to everybody, I'll put a little bowl of feed in there for the little ones, and they just slip right through, the gaps in the bottom of the gate. They'll come in there, and you do that a little bit, The other, kind of thing that goes with that is that you're taking a little bit of time to prepare them to go into this area where they're separating a little bit from mom, so that when you're ready to grab them and you got the dog crate sitting there and you're going to grab them and throw them in, it's not the first time that they've seen this. They're kind of comfortable being in that area. And then you can throw a piece of hog panel behind them when they come into this little chute type of thing. And again, there's a million and one different ways to do this. You don't have to build something or be this elaborate, but you put a chute, kind of make a little hog panels on each side and a gate in front. And then if you take another piece of hog panel that's the same size as that gate, once the little ones come in, you just put that over the gate so they can't go back out, and take like a couple of zip ties and just zip tie that onto the thing. And mama's going to be busy eating, and she's not going to, especially the bigger that they get, mama is going to be much less concerned with like coming and biting your leg off unless she's like a savage. I've had one sow like that who is currently in the freezer. She was mean. And my weaning area in the barn is set up because I have kind of that little session, that elaborate session that you have to go through in order to wean on the pasture. That's what I do. But in the barn, I have like the weaner pen, and there's a wall kind of behind the pens where the moms are. The weaner pen is behind that. So I just start feeding next to that wall. And when it's time, I just start grabbing them and yoink, and then over the wall. And by the time they start squealing, they're already on the floor on the other side. And I'm just like, I didn't say anything. And mama's like, okay, fair enough. And goes back, puts her face in the bowl, yoink, and off we go. And it just repeat that process. And then after a couple of times, mama's like, yeah, whatever. Because I have had a couple of mamas that even when their babies are big, they're still a little bit spiteful for a while after that, where I get the distinct feeling that they are pissed off at me because they're like, what did you do with my babies? I'm like, you were pissed at them because they were annoying you because they're huge, and they were like, rearranging your nipples every time you would lay down and try to sleep for 5 minutes. Like, come on, I did you a favor. But they don't see it that way all the time. So here we are. Well, folks, it has been, it's right about the 2-hour mark. I always say I'm going to do this in an hour, and it always goes longer. But this is a really enjoyable conversation for me. I hope you guys got something out of this. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, that's a good way to stay connected. If you are subscribed to the channel, appreciate super chats, super chat singular. Also appreciate channel members. I know Red Sky Responder was in here and signed out. Secret Noise Pictures. Have not seen Northern Lightfoot in here, and there's a handful of you folks. I don't think I'm missing anybody that was in here. Oh, GeoGasser also. Isn't GeoGasser is a channel member, aren't you? Sorry, I'm like outing myself as a, yeah, forgot, because we got some new channel members. But yeah, if you guys are able to join as a channel member for a couple bucks a month, that's super appreciated. But there's other ways to kind of help what we're doing, and this goes for like any channel that you are watching. If you watch my videos and you like without ever giving a dime, you can force Google to give me money by basically like hyping videos, watching all the way through, commenting, interacting, but watching all the way through is a big one, because when watch time goes up, that signals to the algorithm that what I'm doing is not a complete, ridiculous waste of time. So pulling a fast one on them for sure. Hey, thanks. I appreciate that, Secret Noise Pictures. Much appreciated. Yeah, but those little things go a real long way also to help things out. And I really appreciate all of you folks. Bolino's Bounty, been in here and at my classes and helped with work. And you guys are all really, we have good conversations, and I really appreciate you guys that are contributing, because financial contributing is certainly appreciated. That's part of it. But moral support and all of that stuff, that's a huge contribution, but it's harder to measure. So I want to make sure that everybody gets that appreciation from my side of things, because I know that there's some of you who either, not everybody, like, I don't, I'm not a channel member for every channel that I watch. I only have like one or two channels, I think one, that I'm a member on Zeb's channel, but I also try to give a little bit what I can just in terms of my time to then help those channels grow. And honestly, I'm super excited because we are at like 1432 when I was on here. I'll have to, I guess I can check it in real time, update the score here. What are we at? Oh, 1440. Here I thought I was going to be in the hole from exposing myself as a radical. But yeah, at 1440, I mean, we've really been crushing it. And I don't know why, frankly, because these are conversations I would have by myself with the pigs, if you guys didn't want to listen. And frankly, I do sometimes. But I'm glad to have you guys here and to sharpen the blades together a little bit by comparing ideas and all of that. It means a lot. And I think that, we're all trying to do good stuff within our own communities and within our families and in our areas of influence. And I'm excited for what's coming next, because ultimately there's a reason why we are all here, a sense of purpose. And Bellino's Bounty said earlier about needing to have the same faith. And I think that that really hits the nail on the head, because that's where your sense of purpose comes from. Because even if I wasn't raising pigs, I have a sense of purpose based on the fact that I know I didn't just fall off a turnip truck and, oh, here I am. Like, there are powers in the universe that be, to be as agnostic as I possibly can for the sake of whatever. But like, God put us here at this time for a reason. And so it's interesting because, hey, he knows what he's doing. So I don't have to worry about everything. I just have to kind of bloom where I'm planted, and having that purpose where that's not a small task, whatever blooming looks like for each of us. That's something that we've been entrusted with. That's a gift we've been given, and we owe it literally to God and the people around us to make that blooming happen and to be productive in the areas that we are placed. So, end things on a little bit of a high note there. I really appreciate you guys for spending the time, and I am excited for what's coming next. I got a couple of different videos that will be coming out this week. The grain bin video, hopefully early in the week, and then maybe by tomorrow or Sunday, I'll have the hanging out on the pasture with the pigs. It'll be great. Oh, I didn't see Ryan in there. Yes. Thanks, man. I appreciate that. They must have like edited that out or something and just put it in like behind everybody. That's so weird because I did not see your message there. But thank you. Yeah, God bless as well. And for everybody. God bless us, everyone. Like Tiny Tim over here with my Red Bull. Bellino's Bounty says your hard work is paying off. The channel in this community is really coming along. Thanks, man. Well, I appreciate it. I have to say, credit where it's due. Mike, you were like the first person to really, and also there's a guy, Ryan. I'm sure Ryan, if he makes it to this point in the video, he's quite devout. And somebody he hasn't been able to, he doesn't always have the scheduling to make it to these live streams, but he always watches through, and then he leaves these like text wall comments that are typically very insightful and relevant. He's from New Jersey. Super cool guy. And there's a couple of you that have been here like from the beginning, but it's always cool to make friends with new people. And when you start to see him again, it goes from being like, oh yeah, this one guy that one time, to being somebody who's like, they're a regular. And now you're buddies and you look out for them, and you watch their videos, or like you go through, get to have those interactions and follow up and maintain and build, and it's good. It's good. So anyways, everybody have a good evening. God bless. And well, we're doing what we got to do. I got to think of a different tagline, because the Make America Farmers Again thing, I'm kind of kind of off that train. But I mean, that is kind of what we're doing, but I got to put a different branding on it. But I got to put my creative genius to that end. So y'all have a good night, good weekend. See you soon. Oh, well, we got